Good evening, welcome to MOTS presents MOTS Ado About Nothing.
MOTS Ado About Nothing. MOTS Ado About Nothing.
Where we apply the revolutionary MOTS scale to classic and contemporary literature.
MOTS Ado About Nothing. MOTS Ado About Nothing.
This podcast contains mature content, spoilers, language. You have been warned.
Good evening, good evening, good evening. I'm Jonathan Ian Manser, here with another MOTS Ado About Nothing. I'm here with Chris Morgan.
Good evening.
And Scott Thurlow.
How ya folks doing?
Today we are delving back into a random collection of short stories I have from an ancient book from the 1960s.
A lost collection of random
Cool.
stories that were contemporary at the time, we'll say.
Short stories from the literary magazines, which is the most generic title of all time.
Indeed it is, yes.
So we are discussing The Fat Guy by Henry Roth, which you cannot find on the internet.
Yeah,
I actually had to make photocopies of the story.
I dare you to go find this story. Sorry we can't link it, but...
So we're going to Chris for the funny logline for the story.
Okay, I'm going to kind of paraphrase a quote from Pulp Fiction, and I'm no Samuel L. Jackson. But this story, shut the fuck up, fat man. Your life ain't none of your goddamn business.
Sure. That's actually pretty good, actually.
All right. Well, I will do the intro body conclusion to start us off with a brief synopsis of the story. Basically, it's about a fat guy who's a comedian, or as I like to say, the Louis Anderson story here. And it's about this comedian who has made a mildly successful career of a self-deprecating humor about his weight. And everyone from his first manager, who was his father, to his current manager,
agent,
all push him to retain this heavy weight because he's funny, because he's a fat guy. And you can make mediocre jokes more effective when people are laughing both with you and at you. And also the fear that derives from them fearing that they will be you one day.
Sure.
So he starts having health problems and is considering the fact that the worth of whether losing the weight but losing his career, or retaining the weight and perhaps dying very soon.
Early, but known and famous in the comedian circle, Sort of a B or C level celebrity.
Yeah, but that is more than most people have in life. So he wants to retain his identity. His identity is being a fat guy. And it's kind of a fascinating character of study on that decision between, in a way, what fame is worth. And it ends up with him deciding to forego his good health in order to retain his...
To keep his stick going.
Yeah. There's a very poignant quote at the end of this story, which I think summarizes his entire mental state perfectly. And so Morty chose not wisely, but for love.
Yes, I remember that line. It's good. I agree. And I think you're right. It sort of encapsulates the whole little character study arc here, slice of life that we're going to talk about. But yeah.
Yeah. So again, because this is a very short story, it was 6 pages long, it doesn't really have the traditional 3-act structure to it. It's more, as you mentioned, Scott, very slice of life. So I really don't know how to divvy it up. So will you guys attempt to convince me on what the score is?
I think I'm going to give it a 3. I think because maybe due to its very nature of it being such a short story, that if this were a film or maybe a little 5-10 minute short video, I think not a second is wasted. There's no unnecessary parts of the story. There's no lines that were wasted. It tells you everything you need to know in a condensed, but not leaving out any details. It's just a day in the life of this guy, and here's his mindset. Here's how he is at this point in his life, and here's the choice that he makes. So I think it was a very nicely flowing story. It was, if not a page turner, it was easy to follow along and end it quickly enough, but I think exactly where it needed to end. So that's my view.
Yeah, I will agree with you on that. You deal with both what his motivations were for choosing his lifestyle, and you also see laid out by his manager as, I guess, the devil on his shoulder, and the doctor as the angel on the shoulder, giving the legitimate reasons. You actually see the conflict in that choice there,
sure.
And you see the stakes. No pun on the fat guy. So I don't know. I will agree with that 3.
I'm back and forth because the flow of the story was really good. I think you guys basically said it all. There wasn't any real meandering. It was pretty, concise, but the story depressed the fucking hell out of me. And the ending,
sort of kind of the point here.
I know, but I knew how it was going to end. But what I really wanted him to do it was, tell his, agent to go fuck himself and leave.
Of course, that's what you're rooting for as the audience, but
Yeah. So I don't really know if to give it a 2 or a 3 because on the one hand, I didn't enjoy it. On the other hand, it was really well constructed.
yeah, whether that made you feel good, do you think it was well put together as a narrative?
Yeah, it was well put together as a narrative.
All right.
So
I think we're all giving it a 3 then.
All right, and Scott, it's on to you with themes.
All right, so sort of again, there's not much time in this story, but I think you touched upon it in your synopsis, E. That sort of what are you willing to sacrifice for, I guess, fame or for a life that you've worked for, even though it may mean having ill health. And even in the context of, yes, this guy, Morty is the character's name, is known as a fat comedian. And he could be a lesser comedian. Like, he might not be as popular were it not for that part of his character, both physically and sort of his set, material, if you will. And he has to decide he experiences a rather, frightening health-related sort of, I don't know how to describe it. Like, he gets sort of breath. He sort of like hallucinates a bit. Like he just can't stand up in the world for a moment and realize like that's pretty bad. I should go see a doctor about this. And the doctor's like, yeah, you could probably stand to lose some weight if you keep going the way you're going. I don't think you might have a lot of time left.
Not only that, the doctor outright suggests that you can't lose all that weight at once. You need to.
I was actually about to bring that up. Yeah,
you're right about that. So there's that little detail included. So I mean, like, it's just like you said, who you want to be versus what it might cost you mentally and physically and or both.
But the whole thing with the weight and going to the doctor, that's the whole thing about people is everybody always avoids going to the doctor. And, if they do, they don't always follow the doctor's advice. So I don't think, I think it's a good, and thematically, I think you don't have to identify it like as just something that, that's happening to this guy that everybody does in one form or another. So
sure, you're right. I mean, it speaks to greater sort of implications of such nature. And I agree with that. Just filtered through the light of this character and his profession.
His agent, Danny Cracker, actually has the line. He basically says, yeah, if you lose all that weight, you'll get a year worth of like diet jokes and things like that, but then people will forget about you.
Yeah, then you'll disappear. Sure.
So again, it's a theme of having to make those like what that sacrifice is, and the idea is that final line that I mentioned in the synopsis was he did it for love. It's not for him loving it; it's to be loved.
Sure, exactly. Of course.
And it is. I don't know. It's such a tragic story.
No, I agree. I mean, like you said, Chris. Yeah, it's depressing, but at least Ian and myself, I think, more naturally gravitate towards these kinds of things, and not that I like disliked it or anything. This isn't like we've mentioned this. This is more up Ian's alley than would be mine. Like, it's sort of like an everyday, mundane kind of thing, but nevertheless touching upon important topics. And yeah, I think it's two things. What we sort of both just said, but also like your self-identity. It's sort of tied in this case again to his profession. So changing one changes the other. Right. So again, what you're willing to sacrifice in terms of both those things, or to live a life you want, but maybe live less of that life time-wise.
Yeah, but I think it's by the title of the short story. It's not Morty's like decision or something like that. It's the fat guy.
Sure.
And like that goes right into what you're saying about identity.
Yep. Now you're right about that. Even the title itself is sort of like a comment upon that. So I think I'm going to have to give it a 1. Like, it's not a lot of themes, of course, but it's 1 or 2, 1.5 handled very well. And, sort of spit back at you or something for you to think about reading a fictional story of this fictional fat guy comedic character.
But to, I guess, follow up on a secondary point, but I think it's tied in with it. Two of the other characters that you meet when you hear about are Morty's father, who's an alcoholic, but
and
was a successful manager.
Sure.
And Danny is a cigar smoker. So, like, they all have their vices there.
Sure, exactly. Yeah.
And
no, I mean, that's a good point. That's fair. And I just think, given all that, I'll probably give it a 1. Got anything else to add?
No, I'm going to give it a 1.
All right.
I agree, 1. Now, Chris, it's on to you for the antagonist.
Well, this is really interesting because obviously you have to say Danny Cracker, but I think we've all pretty much touched about that. Part of the antagonist is his weight, and definitely an antagonist of it is his self-esteem. That's what he's
himself.
basically, yeah.
That's what going to be my
so,
answer.
I think I'm going to have to go with himself as the main antagonist. And, I was just thinking about the ending we were just talking about, and what thing that makes it really tragic and really drives us home is when Morty thinking about that he doesn't remember what real food tastes like, because basically his shtick is he goes to restaurants and eats, cheesecakes and all sorts of stuff. And Danny orders shrimp cocktail and skirt steak or chicken soup, club steak, sorry. And he's ordering this really elaborate dinner, and Morty's pondering on it. What is he going to do? And he ends up ordering yogurt, looks at his doctor, or orders yogurt after he chose, wisely, but he chose not wisely, but for love. And then he's like put 3 scoops of, cherry vanilla on it. I mean, just the fact that he's sitting there it's like Danny's sitting there throwing the shit in his face.
Literally. Sometimes.
Yeah. So, it's definitely his self-esteem.
I agree with that as the main antagonist, man versus himself, and your self-image almost, sort of like the autobiographical question. P.S. Check out the Neophytes of Narratology episode upon that. But, I mean, that's all true, I think. But it's funny that you mentioned Danny Cracker as the antagonist. I was going to wait to speak in secondary and or dialogue, but he's like the scumbag agent that sort of is a caricature. But he's he's his friend. He's Morty's friend, but also he wants to keep having...
Morty considers him his friend. You don't really know...
Sure. I mean, again, he acts shady. His dialogue is even, come on, kid, you can do it. The old thing like that.
But I think Ian said it right. He's the devil on his shoulder.
Yeah, actually, you're right about that. So, I mean,
the choice is ultimately Morty's.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I'm going to agree with that, Chris, that he's his own antagonist, or at least the most in this story. And I think that's sort of always effective, having to struggle with your own decisions internally.
Yeah.
And I think it's a very effective antagonist, in especially for the themes of the story, or for what the purpose of the story is.
Yes,
so I'm giving it a 1.
I agree with that as well.
Yep.
All right, I'm on to protagonist, which, shocker, is Morty.
No, it's the fat guy.
Yeah. Well, yes, in a way.
See?
Or actually, perhaps you can say the antagonist is the fat guy, and the protagonist is who Morty could have been.
That's very well put.
But regardless, I like the idea of the identity here, because they actually define Morty in several ways. You mentioned earlier, Chris, that he eats cheesecake and banana splits and all of that kind of food stuff as his main diet, and he has desserts named after him in restaurants.
Sure, it's like part of his image, if you will.
But that is his legacy.
Yeah,
his legacy is the fat guy.
Yeah, and he doesn't remember what real food tastes like. He wants to. His agent basically throws it up in his face, and it's who he wants to be versus who he is. It's
very much like his father, who was an alcoholic. I think Danny Cracker says at one point, if only he had chosen women over booze, he would have been the best agent of all time. And everyone has their vices that destroy them, and his is not gluttony, oddly enough, even though it seems like it should be, but it's pride. It is vanity. Mm-hmm. So I think he's an incredibly tragic figure, and even though we don't see him necessarily, his demise in this work,
it's sort of implied.
It's going to happen
sooner rather than later. Sure, I mean, you're right. I think he is quite effective given for all that, and portrayed very well. Again, in this brief story, that the screen time, if you will, he has is very effective, and he embodies all of that.
Okay, this one's all around.
Yep.
Yeah, this one is all around.
All right, Scott, onto supporting characters.
All right, Danny Cracker, I would say, is my favorite, of course. Yes, like I said, I just described him, kind of gave it away. He's sort of your Hollywood depiction of shady dirtbag agent, just trying to get his clients to keep going, even if it's not the best thing for them. He wants to make the money off it. Yeah, he's sitting in his face, ordering elaborate steak and so forth, and smoking a cigar, blowing smoke in his face. Come on, kid, this is your thing. You got to keep it up. But then he seems like, it's weird because at least Cracker himself seems like somewhat concerned, legitimately, at the end. Or maybe pushing him too far. But I don't think he's all that. It doesn't weigh as heavily on his conscience, perhaps.
Maybe I'm looking at him. Oh, well, first of all, I think he started off as a pimp.
Yes, it doesn't even mention, right? Yeah,
actually,
a hustler.
But he's more legitimate now. He's producing stage plays and things like that.
Sure.
So the thing is, I don't know if he actually cares about Morty, and it's from Morty's point of view.
Yeah, so it's sort of.
So he might want to feel that, or he could view Morty as a meal ticket that he's about to lose.
Yeah, exactly. I think maybe Ray was back and forth, but certainly up front on face value, he's more the devil on the shoulder, as you were saying. Yeah. So, anyways, I still think he's a well-done dirtbag agent, I guess I want to say. Again, for the brief part that he was there. And then I guess you can say the doctors who, are playing the opposite coin to Morty, who tell him you maybe should slow down. Maybe this isn't the best idea, even though, yes, it's your lifeblood of your career, but you could be dead, so forget about lifeblood. So I think, again, there aren't that many. There's a cab driver, I guess, who hardly has any part at all, but he's there. But I think they're effective, especially Cracker. They fill out the world of this, again, this little, day in the life of character, and it's believable, I would say, and I think they were written quite well.
What I thought was interesting was one part where he's talking to Cracker, and he basically hits him in a soft spot, and Cracker puts out a cigar, and Morty remarks that he just wasted a $2 cigar on him. So, and it's just like the levels of Morty that he's aware of him, that it doesn't seem like Cracker's aware of Morty. And no, I agree with you. Cracker was an effective supporting character. And I like the doctors too, so.
There is one quote I want to read from Morty about Danny, where Danny will hook Morty up with some of his girls.
Women friends, that's true, that's right.
That's
So
right.
they're talking about how, like, the last time Morty ended up bruising one of the girls. So at the end he goes, Danny goes, something wrong, kid? And Morty goes, no, just worry about me once a year. I'm not smooth-skinned, but I bruise sometimes too.
Yeah,
And I think like that kind of vulnerability, and again, that strikes me as the more callous Danny Cracker. But
no, I
either
agree.
way, they're effective.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say, and that's why I'm going to give him a 1.
I agree.
All right, Chris, on to you with dialogue.
This is one, the story is pretty much in first person for most of it, until like basically the ending where he actually.
No, it's not. It's not in first person. It's in third person.
Oh, you know what's really funny? You're so far into his head, I didn't even realize that.
Well, there you go. Maybe that's a case for effective.
Yeah, sorry. I was going to say delete this part, but no, I mean, really, it did. It is, the dialogue's really effective. It's definitely Morty's point of view to the point where I was just like, wait, I was picturing most of it in first person. So, all right, I guess I'm giving it a 1.
Maybe that might speak to style, but sure. I mean, again, just something we mentioned on other casts when we run up against dialogue, that it feels just natural. I believe these characters would be saying this, and you're right. Like, you get into you're in Morty's mindset.
Yeah.
So, like, again, it's filtered through that point of view. Sure, even if it isn't technically in first person, but regardless, that it's a natural, like, guy sitting at a table with his agent, and here's a situation, and he's just experienced sort of an alarming health-related issue, and they're discussing his career. And then I think you're right, E. Like, it's not quite dialogue, but maybe style. That line you read, like, that was pretty perfect. And the final line is him ordering yogurt, so it is a spoken line of dialogue. And yeah, I think it's not like the most mind-blowing, like, flowery stuff, but it serves its point and is believable, and it's the best thing I can say about it.
I think the best point about the dialogue is that Morty and Henry Roth, I would say, writing for Morty, really shows the fact that he's a comedian, not a great comedian, but his self-deprecation really shows through in like, he will deflect harsh realities through humor, which is how I think most comedians get their start. But he felt like a real comedian that I could
relate to, perhaps. Yeah,
in a way, it kind of reminds me of an episode of Louis, if you ever seen that. Not in the same way of, like, because Louis not but that kind of self-deprecation and kind of real kind of slice of life.
Yes.
And I have to say the dialogue works really well for that.
Yep, I'll agree. I'll give it a 1.
Okay, it's on to me with style, which I kind of just spoke about. Is that 1 for you, Chris?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. All right. I just talked about style. I just kind of mentioned it with the idea of it felt like an episode of Louis, or any kind of comedy that focuses really on a poor character work. But this is darker than that general viewpoint.
Yeah, sure.
That you'll see on a TV show. Overall, the style was like nothing great. His descriptions were fine. His prose was fine. I don't know. What do you guys think?
That's a tough one for me, too. I was sort of debating with myself. I thought maybe you could make a stronger case for something either way. But you're right. It was perfectly fine. It just, I don't know. This is going to flow into whether or not I recommend the story as well. That it was just like there. Again, it's almost like a backhanded compliment when I say something like this, that because it was so believable, that means it almost like didn't stand out, because it's like it's an everyday conversation, an everyday situation. So like if it felt less real, then I complain that it felt stilted or something. It didn't, but it also didn't grab me all that much just because of that fact. So it's I don't know. You got anything, Chris? What do you got?
I've been thinking about this while you guys are talking, and I think basically the things we talked about, the conflicts and the approach to it, I think we pretty much covered in themes and dialogue. And I think style wise, this was kind of like, all right, this is the way it's presented. And to be honest with you, it's a competent story. It flows easy. But if we're going to make an argument for everything, I cannot make an argument for style. So I'm going to give it a 0.
I might give it a soft 0.
I'm giving it a soft 0 as well.
Yeah.
Because this was either going to get a soft 1 or soft 0.
Yeah, exactly.
And Chris, you won me over with that. So it's on to recommendation with Scott.
All right. Again, so similar problem. Yeah, I think it's a pretty good story, and yeah, it's depressing. I sort of like that stuff, but I don't know if I necessarily recommend it around. I could think of other stories. Like I'll still Ian's sort of standby answer to this question that there are other depressing like stories set in non-fantastical things, and again, slice of life, a little modern little situation happening that sort of just reminds you how depressing life can sometimes be and how harsh it can be. But would I recommend this one? Probably. I might forget about this story, in fact, in a week or two. And I think maybe that's the most damning thing about it. Like, yeah, I liked it when I was reading it, but I don't think I'll think about it again hereafter very much, or if at all. So I think that may be the case for again, maybe a softer 0, but I might be leaning towards that unless you guys can convince me of something otherwise.
Nope.
All right.
Well, I did recommend this one, so I'm going to give it a 1 off of that. If you stumble across the story in a collection of short stories...
Such as we did.
Well, yeah, exactly. That's how I found this.
Sure.
I kind of wish I think this is a very competent short story, and actually the themes are...
No, it's quite good. Like I said, it's
timeless.
Just, I said what I said about it.
It's not... It doesn't elevate beyond to greatness, but it's a good story. So I'm going to give it a 1 just because I did recommend it. If someone else had proposed this as a story, I might feel otherwise, but because of our kind of tradition of...
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm going to give it a 1.
You recommend your own recommendation, of course, and that's completely valid.
All right, so in a weird reversal, I gave it the highest score of a 9.
Oh my god, it's the apocalypse, my friends.
And Scott and Chris gave it an 8, giving this a total score of an 8.333
Sure.
repeating.
That's still pretty damn respectable. Yeah,
Yes.
It's a good neat little short story. I just won't personally probably think about it.
Yeah.
But hey, if you happen to find the story, or if you can find it now that we've mentioned it to you, sure, give it a read.
Yeah, and again, I think this deserves to be read, but that's me, and this is my taste of a story, as Scott pointed out earlier.
This is like the, after dinner mint, as you grab out the restaurant version of like, the Ice Storm. The Ice Storm's a movie I just watched, and it was really well constructed, but it was depressing, and I would never recommend that movie, even though I didn't hate it. It was well constructed. I feel the same way about this. It's like, I didn't hate it because it was well constructed, but I hated it because, because of the way it made me feel.
Sure.
Fair enough.
But, you respect it. It's not, it's not a bad story by any stretch of the imagination.
Oh.
Well, we'll review Ice Storm later down the line. We'll check that episode out.
All right, I'm Jonathan Niemeyer, here with Chris Morgan.
Good night.
And a man who's neither fat nor a comedian, Scott Pillow.
And I want 37 pieces of pie right now. Good night.
MOTS Ado About Nothing. MOTS Ado About Nothing. Music by Chris Morgan. Editing and engineering by Stephen Hermosi.
MOTS Ado About Nothing.
This has been a Lost Cinemas production. All rights reserved.